please.
Thanks.
I think we're taking a break in 5, so I might come back after the break as well if it's possible. Yeah, okay. So I'll keep us on the same topic since we've begun here. Could somebody just clarify for me, you made it sound quite persuasively as though the Australian government has increased the aid budget into Burma. My understanding is that it's actually completely the opposite. Could you just clarify for us? I understand actually we've cut our aid funding into Burma, and for the purposes of this conversation I'll include funding into the border areas on the Thai side at least by around 40%. Can you clarify the actual position for us, please?
Senator, in relation to that earlier conversation, the funding that was referred to as humanitarian funding that either comes out of devolved funding that we have for Burma for the year or through our emergency funds. So they're in response to humanitarian needs at the time, and there's been 2 announcements recently. That's where that funding's come from.
That's good to know. So for tactical emergencies, you're able to swing funding in that might not have been on the books originally?
Yeah, so we have a humanitarian funding of about $338 million this year. Of that, there's a discretionary amount of $120 million that applies to the year. So as things like the Nepal earthquake comes up, so we have access, and that'll continue under the budget for next year as well.
All right. So my understanding is that the Minister announced funding in the order of $6 million for Rakhine province. That was coming out of that appropriation?
It was coming out of a devolved humanitarian bucket to Burma. We devolved some money out during the year. The second amount of money came out of the emergency fund from memory.
Can you split for us? And I don't know whether it would make more sense to have this taken on notice, but I'm keen to get an idea of whether overall we are spending, how much less we are spending on Burma than last financial year and the one before. Would you dispute my contention that actually it's been quite a steep net loss?
Well, yes, at the moment, in terms of our funding for 14-15, it would be similar in terms of the bilateral program to last year. So we can get those figures for you, but I think you'll find between 13-14 and 14-15 that when you add the humanitarian in, it'll either be similar or slightly increased, I think.
All right. If you're able to clarify that for us, and I don't know that it's worth going through the spreadsheet back and forth now, but what the base funding is and when the emergency funding or the humanitarian funding arrives, whether it's being drawn from other parts of the country where presumably there were already identified areas of need, or whether it came from a separate appropriation, just how much of the breakdown?
I can certainly confirm that the humanitarian funding that was recently announced came from a different bucket, not from elsewhere within the countries.
Okay.
It was funding specifically for humanitarian.
Okay, that's a helpful start. So then all I'm interested in, the only other area, is to work out what the net effect of that would be overall.
I'll be able to give you that shortly after.
Maybe after the break. That'd be greatly appreciated. At what level was the government of Myanmar represented at the meeting that Senator Fawcett had opened up about before?
Senator, it was at the level of Acting Director General of Foreign Affairs.
Okay, it wasn't ministerial level?
No, there were no ministers present, Senator, with the exception of the Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand, who made an opening statement, and I think he remained for the first part of the first session. But it was a senior officials meeting, Senator.
Okay. Before we go to the break, and we'll come back on similar line afterwards, what, apart from that multilateral forum, which sounds like it was timely, although maybe a bit disappointing in outcome, what representations has the Australian government made to the government of Myanmar in relation to the bigger picture issues, the deportations, the treatment, the beatings, the killings, the rapes, the burning of towns? What diplomatic measures have we taken thus far?
Craig Chittick, First Assistant Secretary of the Southeast Asia Mainland and Regional Division. Senator, we engage bilaterally, both diplomatically and through our aid program, to seek to develop and improve the situation in Rakhine State, from where the majority of Rohingyas live in Burma. The issues there are both security ones in terms of the intercommunal violence that broke out there in 2012, but they are also economic ones. Rakhine State is the poorest state, along with Chin State in Burma, and there are both economic and security issues there. In addition to the regional advocacy the Ambassador mentioned, we have ongoing diplomatic engagement in Burma and where other opportunities arise. We held our inaugural Foreign Ministry consultations in Naypyidaw at the end of April. I led the delegation from Australia to that, and during the course of that meeting we had an opportunity to register our concerns about the situation in Rakhine State, which remains poor, both from a security and an economic perspective, and that allowed us to put forward our key points. Those key points are that we want...
If you could just conclude, we will come back during the morning, but I just want to suspend, so as soon as you're in a position to do that, please let me know.
Okay. So we advocate to increase economic opportunities for both the Rakhine and Rohingya communities in Rakhine State. We ask the central and local governments to provide leadership on the issue of promoting values of tolerance and diversity, to prosecute perpetrators of violence in Rakhine State, and setting a clear pathway for citizenship for all those who identify as Rohingya.
Thank you. Can you just hold it up?
Thanks very much, Chair. Could we just come back to, I put a couple of questions on notice earlier. In the last budget, Australia slashed $28 million from the foreign aid budget to Burma. You've then appropriated an extra $6 million in emergency aid into agencies working in Rakhine. That would appear to me to be a net drop of $22 million. Do you want to just clarify what the position
Senator,
is?
in relation to what you're talking about at the moment is a 15-16 allocation and a 14-15 allocation. So in 14-15, the Burma program, the bilateral program increased. And as I said earlier, the humanitarian funding was, if it's not the same, it's very close. It's $9 or $10 million, and I'll clarify that on notice for you. So the expenditure this year is greater overall for Burma than it was in 13-14.
In 14-15?
In 14-15, yes, it will be, yes.
And
The total funding.
if you want to go back and just provide this on notice to us, just compare it with the 13-14 budget as well. I've been following this one for a while. So do you dispute that $28 million was cut from the budget into Burma?
In 14-15, that's not correct. It's 15-16. It's next financial year that you're talking about. There is a reduction in that program, yes.
Of $28 million?
I'll clarify with Mr Wood, but it would be...
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr McDonald. Senator Ludlam, the bilateral country programme to Burma, as Mr McDonald said, increased in 14-15. In 13-14, it was about 62 million. In 14-15, it was 70.1. And in 15-16, it is 42.1.
Whack.
Those details were released on budget night.
So that's why people haven't been celebrating so much about the net increase, because it's actually not. You went from 70 to 41. What's for the forthcoming financial year, what's the amount?
Senator, in 2015-16, the bilateral country programme to Burma will be $42.1 million.
And of course,
that's not inclusive of the $6 million.
And of course, there'll be humanitarian funding next year, as there has been on the previous 2 financial years. This year, as I said, we've given $9 or $10 million. I would expect we'd give at least the same next year. So that humanitarian budget, as I said earlier, Senator Ludlam, has not reduced significantly next year. It's $328.9 million and was $338 million this year.
Okay. All right. We might come back to some of that on notice. That would be helpful. Thank you for providing that. Where's that money being pulled from? From 70 to 42 is a huge reduction. Where's it coming from?
Senator, as you'd be aware, there was a reduction in the aid budget announced in MyEFO.
Well aware.
The allocations were decided by government and announced on budget night. And those allocations are on our website and have been on our website since budget night, so you're able to compare the allocations for 15-16 with the allocations for 14-15, so they're publicly available and you'll be able to see where the $4 billion that we have in the aid program is being expended in 15-16.
Senator Ludlam. Yeah, Senator Ludlam, would you mind if I just requested on that document?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I will be asking questions also about that document, but I would also like to compare it to the identical document which was published last year, because there appear to be some changes in the 14-15 allocation from what was asserted to be the allocation last year for various programs and what is now the allocation for the 14-15 budget reproduced. So. So what your answer to Senator Ludlam is correct to a point, except that what you're now saying is the 14-15 allocation is not what you told us for some programs last year, and I just want to, there may well be good reasons for that, but I just want to give you notice that there's two versions, last year's version and this year's, so I'd like to understand the difference between them. Thank you, Senator Ludlam.
That's helpful. So I want to come back to, I'll leave the precise budget allocations there, but I want to come back to the issue of the Rohingya and the situation that they face there, and particularly some comments that were made earlier in response to Senator Fawcett's line of questioning about how there was interest expressed by some of the other representatives at that meeting in Australia's approach of sovereign borders, of pushing people back out to sea. And I'm just interested in a little bit more information about precisely what the government is advocating that other countries do when you have thousands of people fleeing really quite horrific circumstances of violence in their home country. How does the Australian government propose to deal with these issues if everybody is pushing boats back to sea? Where precisely does the Australian government think they should go? And if I've misrepresented the government's position at that meeting, I'm happy to be corrected.
Senator, I think you're looking at me.
You attended the meeting, yeah?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to, if you want to lead off.
Well, can I say that the meeting that I attended welcomed the fact that the governments of Indonesia and Malaysia have agreed to give temporary refuge to these people, and that's not an outcome that we dissented from.
Okay. That's somewhat contradictory to the evidence that you gave earlier, which said that Australia was pushing some kind of sovereign borders style intervention.
With respect, I don't think the officer said was pushing. I think he made mention of that.
Yeah, so I'm very happy if you want to clarify
they were pushing that policy.
Perhaps I can. You're asking me government policy, so perhaps
I'm asking what position was represented at a meeting that this officer was at that you presumably weren't, Senator Brandis.
Well,
I'm not asking for a policy question.
Well, I thought it was a policy question because of the way in which you phrased your question, and the officer is, of course, welcome to respond to the particular point the question you now raise as to what position was put at the meeting.
Yeah.
But the position that was put at the meeting was a position consistent with the policy of the Australian government to eliminate people smuggling. And I can tell you, Senator Ludlam, that the successful policies of this government to eliminate people smuggling are being watched with admiration by other governments faced with this problem elsewhere in the world.
It hasn't eliminated people smuggling. It's done no such thing. Otherwise, these people wouldn't be being trafficked.
It's eliminated people trafficking to Australia, Senator Ludlam.
It hasn't stopped people climbing on boats to extremely uncertain fate.
What we want is for people not to climb on boats, Senator Ludlam. And that is the objective of our policy, and we have had more success in the prosecution of that policy than any other Australian government. Now,
thousands of people are still climbing onto boats.
That is the background. That is the background to the policy that was put by Australia at the meeting. And perhaps the officer can respond with more particularity to your question.
That's correct, Senator. We weren't in the position at that meeting to advocate to particular countries how they should exercise their sovereign rights and their international obligations. particularly given different countries have different international obligations depending on their particular treaty arrangements. What we did do is we outlined Australia's policy and practice, and we did link that to what we believe are the very successful outcomes in terms of preventing deaths at sea. We also talked about the law enforcement cooperation, information sharing and capacity building work that we're doing in the region to assist other governments to take whatever steps they deem necessary and fit in respect of their own management of this situation.
It's worth noting that a number of governments in the region have been quite heavily criticised for complicity, if anything, with trafficking networks that prey on vulnerable people trying to flee these circumstances. But I want to put to you a comment that was made by Brad Adams, who's the Asia Director of Human Rights Watch, who said Thailand, Malaysia and Burma must agree to never again engage in the pushback of people stuck at sea, find any remaining boats, bring those on board to safe ports and ensure that their rights were respected. But that's precisely diametrically opposite the policy that Australia has adopted, which has been quite successful at preventing people from arriving, but it certainly hasn't stopped people from leaving. It's just that we're pushing them back.
That's factually wrong, Senator Ludlam. Now, you're either ignorant of the fact that it's factually wrong, or you are saying what you're saying knowing that it is factually wrong. The departure from Indonesia of people seeking to make passage on leaky boats to Australia has collapsed since the success of the Abbott government's border protection policies, including towbacks.
So I'm just interested in your views on the inconsistency, or whether the Australian government is supportive, I guess, of that comment of the Asia Director of Human Rights Watch, impressing on Thailand, Malaysia and Burma to never again agree to engage in the pushback of people stuck at sea.
No, Senator.
No, what? Were you at this meeting, Senator Brandis, or not?
No, I'm sorry, Senator Ludlam, you asked...
I'm asking
You asked whether I agreed with a comment.
No, I wasn't speaking to you. You
can't ask an official to comment on policy. The remark that you've read, which I assume is an accurate representation of what was said by this man, was a comment on Australian policy. You know that you can't ask officials to comment on policy, and therefore I assumed that the question was directed to me. If it was directed to the official, it was out of order.
At that meeting, did any other nations or representatives or delegates make representations, formally or informally, regarding Prime Minister Abbott's nope, nope, nope comment in regard to accepting Rohingya refugees? Was that issue or that commentary raised with you or any other Australian representatives?
No, Senator. There was no reference to that, and I would go further and say there was no criticism of any aspect of Australian policy. If anything, there was positive interest in what we were doing and how we were doing it, and an expression of intention on the part of some delegations to continue that dialogue bilaterally.
Was Australia asked formally or informally to accept greater numbers of refugees from that region?
No, Senator. No such request was put to us, either in the meeting or in bilateral meetings.
Okay. So PNG leader Mr Peter O'Neill has called on Australia, that's one instance, I guess that's why I put to you that question specifically, has called on Australia to intervene more robustly to address the crisis in Burma, including taking greater numbers of refugees. But that wasn't brought up at all at the meeting that you attended.
No, Senator. PNG was represented by Chief Migration Officer Rabura, and there was no such statement or request from him.
Okay. I might leave it there. I've got issues on other matters in other parts of the world, but I'll leave that there.
No problem.